I don't think there's any candidate who is making it a centerpiece of his campaign like I am. But I truly believe that this is an urgent priority issue for the country, and it certainly is for me. I've mentioned it in all three of the nationally televised debates. I advocate it everywhere I go, and I don't know of any candidate who has taken a stronger and more just clear position on my primacy of the fair tax as I have. Internal Revenue Service, and for which I could say April 15th is just another beautiful spring day in America. Not a day we dread, but a day we look forward to. And that can happen. It can happen when we pass the fair tax. Now, very clear. Fair Tax Organization is a nonprofit. They are not endorsing me. So I'm not here because they're somehow connecting to my campaign. I'm here because I endorse them. I'm here because I think that the fair tax proposal is the most sensible, approachable, and an important way that we can transform the American economy. I'm the only candidate who has mentioned it on all three nationally televised debates, and I'm also the person who has made it a centerpiece of the campaign everywhere I go because, quite frankly, I realize that it's the best hope we have to empower people who are trying to reach the next rung in the economic spectrum. A lot of people think the fair tax is all about rich people. No, it's about the people who are at the bottom end of the economic spectrum who would really like a shot at a bite of the apple. I was in Manchester, New Hampshire a couple of months ago, and I was at a machine shop and talking to a guy who's working 2 shifts. And the reason he's working 2 shifts at the machine shop is because he's got a daughter that he wants to elevate to a life that he never believed he could have. She's in graduate school at Cornell University, and it's costing $54,000 a year for her to go to Cornell graduate program. $54,000 a year. Here's what he told me. He said, you know what's frustrating? I'm working 2 shifts. But because I'm working the second shift, I'm in a new tax bracket, so now my tax burden is such that it's almost not worth working the second shift because of the extra taxes I'm having to pay. He said, in addition to that, everything that I earn and set aside in savings, the IRS is taxing my savings. He said, so they're getting me every which way I turn. They're taxing me more as a result of my working hard and working harder. They're taxing me because I'm putting it aside and saving it for my daughter. And I guess when I help her to get a graduate degree and she makes more money, she'll be penalized because she's worked so hard to get an advanced degree. Now, the American economy was never designed so that we penalize productivity, but that's what we do with the current tax code. If we had the fair tax, we would replace a punitive tax structure with one that is fair, flat, finite, and family-friendly. One that does not penalize people for being married and raising kids. Currently, there's $10 trillion of working capital that's parked offshore because American companies know they can't keep it in our own nation without it being taxed into oblivion. What would happen?
Jobs being taken away from the American people.
What would happen if we took that $10 trillion and brought that money home and put it in our economy and somebody else's? I'll tell you what would happen. It would mean that the Made in America label would come back to this country. It would mean that manufacturing jobs that we've been losing in your community and mine would start coming home. It would mean that currently American manufacturers who can't compete with the Europeans because they get their VAT, the value-added tax, refunded back to them for their exports, and we don't get that here. It means that we have a competitive opportunity that we don't have. It also means that, imagine this, pastors and leaders of nonprofit organizations could actually say whatever they wanted to from their own pulpits because no longer would there be the threat of the IRS is going to come get you. They're going to take away your tax-exempt status. Since when did the IRS get to control the First Amendment to the Constitution? Have we ever understood how absurd, how completely off the wall it is that we would allow a regulatory agency to dictate the entire capacity for us to enjoy the First Amendment? Of freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of assembly, and yet that's what happens today. Nonprofit organizations are threatened by the IRS. Well, if there's no IRS, there's no threat. Imagine that today the average cost of compliance in the tax code in this country is between $250 and $500 billion, which means that we're spending a lot of money over $250 billion a year, not to develop products, not to research new products, not to market the products we have or to distribute the products, or even to pay our workers better wages for having developed those products. We're paying it just for the process of complying with the tax code, so complicated that no two accountants can agree on the meaning of the 177,000 pages of the tax code that we currently have. Wouldn't it be nice to replace that with a tax code so simple that a 7-year-old running a lemonade stand could understand it? And that's what we have with the fair tax. Now, let me be very frank with you. And I'm sure you're saying, you mean you haven't been up until now? Yes, I actually have. Let me be even more frank with you. People ask me all the time, do you really think Congress is going to pass the fair tax? And the answer is probably not. Until we tell Congress that if they don't, we'll fire them and hire somebody who will. In order for the fair tax to pass, it requires having a president who will go to this country's people, explain what it is, help them to understand how it will positively affect and impact them, and get the people to sell it to the Congress. Because it's not going to work that this idea will originate in Washington. It makes too much sense for it ever to take root in the soil around the Potomac. What's going to happen is, in places like Iowa and Arkansas and other places where people have to live with common sense values, we become so adamant that we make it clear to our members of Congress, either you will do it or we'll fire you and we'll hire somebody who will. It won't happen there because there are 35,000 lobbyists right now in Washington, D.C. lobbying 535 members of Congress, which if you do the math, that means there's about 70 lobbyists per member of Congress. You're outnumbered, folks. I don't know if you know it. You're outnumbered up there. But we can change that. And imagine if we had a tax code for which there are not winners and losers, that everybody who works hard is a winner. Everybody who decides to spend a whole lot of money frivolously, they'll get to pay the tax. But it does many things, and one of the things mentioned, it ends the underground economy. And that would be a great boost for us. Wouldn't it be terrific if the drug dealers, if the pimps, the prostitutes, the gamblers, and the illegals had to pay the same tax that you have to pay? You're sitting here today because you're probably an honest person. I'm not going to ask you if you've cheated on your taxes because I don't want you to get arrested. But chances are you haven't. Chances are you've done what's right. Reality is, not everybody thinks like you. There are a lot of people, they don't do what's right. They don't report their income. They lie and they cheat. And guess who makes up the difference? You do. Under the fair tax, if you buy something, you pay the tax. If you don't buy it, you don't pay the tax. If you don't want to pay that much tax, don't buy as many nice